Britain's on course for a no-deal Brexit on October the 31st. And indeed, France has already said that seems to be the default option. There are several potential roadblocks, though, to this. First of all, the UK Parliament has rejected no deal before and might try to block it again. It would require taking control of the parliamentary timetable. It's a tricky process, and they managed to pass new legislation. They did it back in the spring, you remember, but it was tortuous at best. And if that fails, MPs might try to take the government down and install one that's anti-no deal. The government has a majority, a working majority of only one. Any no-confidence vote would be a serious challenge. And, of course, the nuclear option, royal intervention. Her Majesty's always been politically neutral. Involving her would cause a constitutional crisis, the likes of which the UK has never seen, or at least not for a couple of centuries. John Peet is the political and Brexit editor at The Economist. He joins us from London. Just how much has moved since May, both Theresa and the date, in terms of actually shifting the positions, bearing in mind the arguments haven't changed?
Well, I think we now have a Prime Minister who is making very clear that he's willing to take Britain out of the European Union without a deal. And I think Theresa May blinked several times and was not willing to do that because she saw the consequences as very bad for the British economy, very bad for the Union with Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, and very damaging for Europe. Boris Johnson seems to want to use the fact that he says he's willing to leave with no deal as a bargaining tool to try and extract concessions from the European Union that they've been unwilling to make so far. I'm very sceptical it's going to work.
OK, but from your reading of the European position, at the end of the day, for this to work, the Europeans have to give ground on the backstop. And if what we see is true from Emmanuel Macron of France basically says that's not going to happen. Angela Merkel was being polite today. What's your understanding?
No, I think they're going to be polite. I think even Macron will be polite, although perhaps not as nice as Merkel tried to be to Boris Johnson today. But it is, you know, we've been arguing about this for 3 years now. To set 30 days to come up with something that the European Union believes is credible, I don't think it's going to work. The Irish...
Just wanted to interrupt you there because, forgive me, but does Parliament have the ability, well, it has the ability, but it doesn't have the wherewithal to actually stop a no-deal Brexit? Bearing in mind the way it voted back in the spring, it both voted against a no-deal, but also against the withdrawal agreement.
Well, that's right. I mean, Parliament has shown itself capable of voting against things, but it's not been very good at voting for anything. I think the one thing you can say about the current Parliament, which has not changed since the arrival of Boris Johnson, is that a majority of members of Parliament are against leaving with no deal. Now, the question then becomes, procedurally, how can that majority make itself felt? And a determined Boris Johnson government could try its hardest to stop Parliament from getting in the way, and that's what they say they're going to do. I think the first 2 weeks of September are going to be critically important for this because a number of Conservative MPs I've spoken to are pretty determined to try every procedural trick that they can find to prevent Boris Johnson taking Britain out of the European Union on the 31st of October with no deal. They may even succeed, although I have to say there are doubts about whether they can succeed, and there are doubts about whether, if it came to a real crunch, the nuclear option of throwing the government out of office altogether would work. But as you said, Boris Johnson has a majority of 1 seat. That's pretty tiny, so he's certainly not comfortable in his government.
If you had to answer this question, and you can plead the fifth, as they say over here, do you think the UK will leave on October the 31st?
No, I don't think it will leave on October the 31st. I'm not quite sure what will happen, but I think that a combination of trying to find some solution over the Irish border, parliamentary games to try and stop no deal, and the sheer problem of how much preparation and legislation is required to prepare Britain for life outside the European Union. Almost none of that legislation has been passed. I think if you put all those things together, at the end of the day, even if Boris Johnson complains about it, he will say he was forced to seek more time. Now, I'm not sure the trouble is what more time will do, but... But it could lead to a general election, conceivably even another referendum, although I think that's pretty unlikely at the moment. But there certainly could be a general election.